Good evening. Well, we've heard how things can go terribly wrong. It was a lovely Sunday afternoon in May, beautiful blue sky day down in Victoria. I was 18 years old and I had a date with a young man who I'd only been seeing for a few months. Now, we've heard how over-planning things can go disastrously wrong. Well, our plan was very simple. We were going to go for a little Sunday drive in his late model sports car, and then we were going to stop somewhere to have dessert and afternoon tea. Well, we headed out the Pat Bay Highway, and it wasn't long before we saw the sign for Elk Lake Regional Park. Now, neither of us had ever been to Elk Lake Park. We were both fairly new to the area, so we decided that we would check it out. Now, given how glorious the weather was, it was not a surprise that the beach was packed. But we managed to find a parking place, and a pleasant trail took us away from the noise, through some forest, out into a residential area briefly, and then back alongside a series of small ponds. Now, I had not dressed for a hike. I had dressed for a Sunday afternoon drive and afternoon tea. And so for the sake of my new shoes, which are not unlike the shoes that I'm wearing right now, I suggested that it might be time for us to turn back. But instead of simply turning around and retracing the route that we had taken to get there, we thought that it might be fun to take the faint path that led through the field on our right. We were hoping that it would allow us to make a circuit around the ponds and then we could rejoin the path. Loop trails are always more fun than back and forth trails, so we thought we would try this out. But to our disappointment, that path petered out very quickly. We were confronted with bushes. But through those bushes, we could see glimpses of water. And we were absolutely certain that if we could just make our way through the waist-high brambles and weeds, we would be at the pond, and from there it would be a lovely, easy stroll along the shoreline. What could possibly go wrong? Well, it took us about 20 minutes to bushwhack through those weeds and brambles, and when we finally reached the water's edge, we found an even denser thicket on the left and an unstable bank on our right. Well, just to test it, we took a few trial steps and instantly found ourselves ankle deep in oozing muck. So much for the new shoes. Now, wiser people probably would have turned around at this point. But we were young. We had youth, immortality of youth on our side. We did not yet know the meaning of the word defeat. There were bulrushes in the pond in front of us, but through those bulrushes we could see the promised land. Freshly mown grass, less than a stone's throw away. All that we had to do was to leap from Mini Bulrush Island to Mini Bulrush Island, and a few leaps we would be across. There was a small problem with this strategy, and it became apparent very quickly. I don't know if you've ever tried to do this, but bulrushes are not islands. They are floating clumps of vegetation. The first hop put us into the slime up to our thighs. A few more awkward leaps, and we were submerged to our waists. Well, we were now way, way, way too invested to turn back. So we gritted our teeth and we kept going. And we made it. We reached the end of those bulrushes, only to discover 6 meters of the muddiest water imaginable still separating us from the far shore. Well, the moment of reckoning had arrived. We could choose to make our way back, which would guarantee us another miserable half hour, or we could commit fully and dog paddle. We dog paddled. Now, if everything we'd gone through so far wasn't enough, we had an audience that afternoon. 3 men were training their dogs to retrieve decoys from the pond. We later learned that that pond was, and still is, you can go home and Google this, an official retriever training area. Well, you can imagine how those men's mouths hung open as 2 fully clothed young people swam out of the bulrushes, past their dogs, and climbed up onto the shore beside them. My lovely Sunday afternoon tea outfit was now covered in slime. We were both dripping from the neck down, and we still had to make it all the way back to the parking lot. Well, a funny thing, we passed quite a few people on the trail, the official trail, on our way back, and not one of them had the nerve to ask us what had happened. But we finally made it back to the parking lot, and that's when my date informed me that he wasn't quite comfortable with us getting into his late model sports car in our current state. But good news, he just happened to have 2 pairs of paper coveralls in his trunk, the kind that backyard mechanics use. Well, fair enough, I thought we were dripping with slime, so I took the folded pair of coveralls he handed me and I headed off for the women's restroom. But for some incomprehensible reason, given how packed the beach was that afternoon, the women's restroom was locked, which meant that I had to find a spot in the bushes to wriggle out of my muddy clothes and into my new outfit. But there was still one final humiliation. The paper coveralls my date had handed me were not just any paper coveralls. They had had an incarnation, a past life, as a Halloween costume. An astronaut suit. I had to walk the entire length of a very busy parking lot in a white paper suit that said NASA down the center. Well, our misadventure at Elk Lake could have been the end of our brief relationship, but it was not. Despite the fact that he had made me wear a spacesuit in public, I had somehow managed to fall in love with my fellow dog paddler that afternoon. And I can still remember the precise moment it happened as we were swimming side by side through the slime. He had a wonderful sense, a spirit of adventure, and more importantly, he had a good sense of humor to go along with it. We climbed into his sports car that afternoon, and we both laughed until we were in tears. Well, I married that young man the next summer at the ridiculously young age of 19. It has now been exactly 30 years since we took that unexpected swim in the pond at Elk Lake. And 5 children, 3 grandchildren, and many, many adventures later, we are still laughing. There's one final note. When I tell this story, I like to have my husband in the audience when he can make it. And the only reason he doesn't come to storytelling events is because he is supporting me by looking after our 2 youngest at home normally. He would be here this evening. He would have brought our 10-year-old and our 12-year-old here, but he is at a wedding rehearsal tonight. He has been asked to perform the music for a friend's son's wedding tomorrow, and we will both be at that wedding celebration. And we will both be praying that the young couple who are exchanging their vows tomorrow will have lots of laughter, lots of love, and lots of happy adventures. Thank you.